Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, wherever you may be in the world. I'd like to welcome you to the annual lecture of the Sustainable Gas Institute at Imperial College London. Just a few small housekeeping points before we get underway. So firstly, just to highlight to you that in the settings on your screen, you should be able to choose subtitles to this lecture. I think there are 6 different languages: Chinese, Korean, French, German, Spanish, and Portuguese, if that is of interest. Also, as we go along, it is possible for you to ask questions via the Q&A function on Teams. So near the bottom of your screen, you should see a small, like a speech bubble with a question mark in it. If you click on that, you should be able to submit a question, which will then pop up and we can answer it later on after the lecture. So next slide, please. So like I said, welcome. My name is Adam Hawkes. I am the director of the Sustainable Gas Institute, and I'm a reader in chemical engineering. I want to just give you a bit of background and overview of the Sustainable Gas Institute at Imperial College. So we're established in 2014. And you see our mission there written on the slide. So the key point here is that we really are interested in investigating not only natural gas, but also hydrogen, biogas, biomethane, the role of all gases in future low carbon energy systems. Next slide, please. It's really an interdisciplinary centre. So it's about new sources of gas, I mean, shale gas, etc., but also hydrogen, or balanced against the threat of climate change. So to what extent can we use these energy sources in future energy systems? And it's a very interdisciplinary institute, so covering all of Imperial College's specialist areas of expertise, from engineering and technology, physical and natural sciences, but also branching out into economics, security, policy and regulation. Also a big industry focus, so we're very interested in how industry can respond to this challenge and participate in helping the world to mitigate climate change. Next slide, please. So these are our themes. I only want to talk about this very briefly. So we do evidence-based reviews, which I'll cover on the next slide in a little bit in a moment. Also hydrogen research, so it's a very interesting new energy vector, which is obtaining great interest. We look at methane, so particularly the emissions of methane to the atmosphere and its impact on global warming, and how particularly oil and gas value chains can mitigate those emissions. We have a range of work on modelling the future role of gas in the energy system, and we also do especially commissioned member research. Next slide, please. So just a small advertisement about our white paper series. So this is the evidence-based reviews I mentioned a moment ago. So essentially what we do is we take controversial topical issues related to the future of gas and energy systems, and we perform a thorough assessment of the evidence on those issues, leading to a report and a launch. You can see the previous 5 reports on the screen in front of you there, the most recent of which was on the flexibility of gas and what is it worth in future energy systems. Just to highlight, we will be publishing another white paper in about 9 months' time, and that will be on the role of natural gas in future energy systems. So quite a broad one coming up, and do look out for it. Next slide, please. Okay, so the reason we are here today for the SGI annual lecture is to hear from Professor Maroto-Valer. So Mercedes is doing some very interesting research at Heriot-Watt, which is very relevant to the Sustainable Gas Institute. She is a fellow of 5 societies, five learned societies. She's leading development of the UK Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre. So that's IDRIC. She's also Associate Principal in Global Sustainability at Heriot-Watt University, where she oversees their efforts on environmental sustainability and in developing and leading research on low carbon technologies generally. She's also director of the Research Centre for Carbon Solutions, which is delivering innovation and wider deployment of low carbon energy systems required to meet net zero targets. She really has an internationally recognized track record, and it covers all of the things which are important to the Sustainable Gas Institute, including energy systems, carbon capture, utilization and storage, integration of hydrogen technologies and other low carbon fuels. So I think Mercedes is a great choice to have with us today, and very much looking forward to hearing what she's going to tell us about her research at Heriot-Watt. So please, over to you, Mercedes.
Okay, so thank you very much, Adam, and I think we just got all now in the right slide page as well. So thank you for the introduction, and also many thanks as well for inviting me to give the SGI 2020 annual lecture. So I'm really delighted and really honored to give this lecture. So the title of my presentation, as you have there, is the Industrial Decarbonization, the Role of Gas for a Green Economic Recovery. So in terms of what I will be doing over the next 40-45 minutes is I want to pose a question, trying to address that question through the slides. And then at the end, because it's that time of the year, I'm also going to have a quiz at the end of my presentation. So the question really relates to the title of my presentation, and is how can we realize the role of gas in green recovery? But before that, I just want to share with you, I don't know whether we have any climate skeptics with us, but I do want to share with you the latest evidence about climate change. And this actually has been brought to me by my children. So I'm just going to pause there so you can read it. Good. So moving now into a more serious note, obviously, I want to first reflect on 2020. 2020 has been really a year of global challenges. And when I say this, Facebook also has highlighted 2020 as the year that has changed us all. And I'm sure all have been changed in one way or another through the past 12 months. If we go to some of the key reports that were published this year, you can see in January, the WEF report published the global risks for 2020. And actually the global risks back then, pretty much on the top of the list was the climate related issues. And quite important with that, they also highlighted that there is the next decade, these 2020s, are actually a decade of tremendous opportunity in terms of what we need and have to do to be able to actually take away this risk or minimize the risk of climate change. And quite interesting, if you read the report, the narrative there is that we have to act quickly. And if I take that even further, they say in even what is unsettled a global landscape. And if you think probably back in January, we didn't think we were that unsettled considering everything else that has happened since. We moved then to October. A lot of things have happened or not happened in some cases. And we have a report coming from IMF. And here the report is actually telling us that even when we are in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic crisis, we still actually have to mobilize to prevent the climate change crisis. So the message keeps there around the urgency that we need to act. And we need to make sure that green investment is actually included within the recovery plans. And if I move there now to December 2020 this year, some of you may also have read the production gap report. And basically the message here again is that we have to act. It's an urgency to this. If we do not act, we're actually going to be rebounding and actually going back and keeping the trajectory that we have pre-COVID in terms of our global CO2 emissions. And by the time we come to the end of the 2020s and we start 2030s, put it bluntly, it's too late to act. So we do need to do it. We need to do it now. And also what is important is actions need to be taken. So actually we do this in a just transition, in a just manner. what we need to do really to do this global transition to net zero, that it has to be just, as I said, it has to be at the pace, has to be at the rate and the speed. But when you look at the numbers, so the climate math, as one of the McKinsey reports published it, the maths really are daunting when you look at the numbers. It doesn't mean it's not achievable, because it is achievable, but the task that we have in front of us is formidable. And if you look at that graph on your right-hand side, what you can see is that we have a cumulative carbon budget, is that 570 gigatons. Is not that big considering what historically we have been doing. And what is really important is that if we go above this target, we are not going to meet the 1.5 Paris Agreement. In fact, even if we stay within this budget in that report, that will only give us a 66% chance of keeping within the 1.5. So again, if you look at how that budget gets actually forecast over the years, what is very clear is that there is an urgency, and it's an urgency even between all this uncertainty that we are living these days. So what does it mean net zero within, let's say, start with the European context, and then I will take it down to the UK. So if you look at the graph on the left-hand side, what you can see between carbon, capture and storage, carbon neutral hydrogen, and electrification, those three we actually will be able to take above about 50% of all the industry emissions. And just to highlight, a lot of my presentation is going to be around industrial emissions rather than total CO2 emissions, but you will see that on the slides. Now, if you look then on the role of hydrogen, that Adam already introduced, is a key vector as we want to decarbonize and get net zero. The projections go from, by 2050, we'll have somewhere between 5, maybe up to 8 times as much hydrogen as what we are producing now. And that's quite significant step change, and you are going to see that in the coming slides. And what is quite important as well to recognize is that without policy interventions, and this was reflected in this report, we are not going to be able to achieve this. We are going to need these policy interventions to stimulate investment. And I will talk a little bit about that in the coming slides. So let's get now in the UK, green recovery, what this has meant for us. The benefits of the low carbon economy, we've known this for a long time, going back even to the 2017 benefits for the Clean Growth Strategy report that was published alongside the industrial strategy. And here, if you look at those numbers, the opportunity is around 11% growth between 25 to 2030. Obviously, numbers have to be adjusted, but this is 4 times faster than the rest of the economy. And also a delivery of significant benefits in terms of exports of sales, goods and services, again by 2030. And this report already highlighted different decarbonization strategies for all the sectors that they will have to be delivered in the 2020s. Again, a lot of things have happened in the last year, unprecedented challenges. We come up to July 2020, and there is the Prime Minister, the PM's commitment to fuel green recovery. And within that is a package, as you have there, of 350 million to cut down emissions of heavy industry. And within that heavy industry, we need to make sure that we drive that decarbonization, because otherwise we will not be able to meet our targets. And most recently, I'm sure you have heard about the 10-point plan published this last November, with the key messages around building back better, supporting green jobs, and accelerating our path to net zero, with a commitment of £12 billion in investment, and also with an expectation to rise £42 billion of investment, and then all this will be able to support a minimum of 250,000 jobs. So what does this mean in terms of a net zero target? Let's get a little bit our heads around the numbers and sectors for the UK. And probably many of you are familiar with this. Published in 2019, and this is actually by the Committee on Climate Change, and I will talk more about the recent report in the coming slide. So 2 key messages to take from here. If you first look at the graph on the left-hand side, what you can see there is that in the last 30 years in the UK, we have been able to increase our GDP by 75%, and we have been able to do this even if the CO2 emissions have gone down by around 43%. And this is quite a strong message because there has to be this decoupling between economic growth and CO2 emissions, and we can do that. However, and the second message, a very powerful message, is now on your right graph. The reason why we have been able to do this in the UK and many other countries have been able to do this so far is because we have decarbonized power. And you can see on the graph there that actually the power sector has gone down tremendously in the last years, in the last 30 years, and that's why we have been able to actually produce the graph that you see on the left-hand side. There are a couple of other sectors that haven't seen many changes. One of them, the transport. I'm not going to go into that today, but I'd be delighted to talk about that in another presentation on a follow-up meeting. And a sector also that is going to be struggling and is going to be key is actually industry. Now, historically, industry up to now has not been doing too bad. It has been decreasing their emissions, but you really need to actually look deeper and you realize that the reason why we have been able to decrease emissions up to now from the industrial sector, it has been through some improvements in energy intensity and in some cases also to shift to low carbon industries or low carbon intensity sectors. So we have quite a huge challenge, quite a big challenge in front of us. If I put it into simple terms, I like to say that we have harvested all the low-hanging fruit when it comes to decarbonization. So what we have to do now is much more challenging than anything that we have accomplished before, and we have to do it on a rather short period of time as well. So the Committee on Climate Change, they published yesterday their sixth carbon budget, and I was very fortunate to be part of one of the groups looking at industrial decarbonization as part of the preparation of that report. And I want to highlight those three graphs in there. We'll start with the graph on the left-hand side. I know it may be difficult to see, so what I have done, if you follow the arrows, you can see that the contributions of hydrogen to deliver net zero by 2050 under different scenarios. So what the CCC did is consider five different scenarios that consider different levels from behavior changes, to policy or innovation, and then take a combination of some of those scenarios as well, and from there came up to what is called a balanced scenario. Under any of those scenarios, what you can see in terms of the hydrogen is going to be needed for what is now the manufacturing and construction sector as part of the decarbonization by 2050. If you look at the graph in the middle, now what you have in there is for the hydrogen demand under the balance scenario, that's the scenario I'm going to focus for the next two slides. It's actually a demand that is comparable by 2050 of the electricity system that we have right now. So that's on the order of about 200 terawatts hour. So when you think about that, you know, the challenge, the task ahead of us is formidable, and we are able to do it, but only if we start right now. And if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, one of the things as well that you can see is the role of hydrogen for abatement of manufacturing and construction. So you can see that will be there, that role of hydrogen. And what is very important here, and the CCC has reflected this on the report, is that actually this is going to be requiring a policy to drive not only emissions reductions, but also to ensure that we do not drive manufacturing overseas. And this is something we need to be very clear. We want to keep our industries and our manufacturing sector in the UK. We want to reduce our CO2 emissions. And what we do not want to do is actually have carbon leakage from other countries because we shut down our manufacturing. So other things that are happening in terms of the UK, you have some the funding mechanisms put by base. They are not all inclusive, so there are obviously many other things going on right now, but I just wanted to highlight some of them. So if you start with the right-hand side, you have the Clean Steel Fund. So there are some funds and opportunities targeting specific sectors. Then you have the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, IETF, looking more things like related, for instance, to energy efficiency and resource efficiency. And the first part of this 315 million was released this last June. It's a competition going on for the first 30 millions or more as part of that funding package. Then you have the Transforming the Foundation Industries, the TFI fund, and here it's actually focusing on 6 sectors. Together, these 6 sectors contribute to 52 billion of the UK economy, and they're the highly energy intensive, so cement, metals, paper, glass, chemicals, and ceramics. And the one I want to focus is that one in there, is the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge. And this actually looks at industrial CCS, fuel switching, sites within a specific clusters, and obviously hydrogen as well being key. So let me unpack a little bit more that red box that you have there. So what is the Industrial Clusters Mission? The Industrial Clusters Mission was set up to establish at least one low carbon industrial cluster by 2030 and the world's first net zero carbon industrial cluster by 2040. Again, if you have followed the announcements that have been this year, including the spending review 2020, what you are aware is that now there is a £1 billion to actually look at CCUS clusters in plural by 2030. And the objective here will be to have 10 million tons of CO2 capture per year by that 2030 as well. So these are positive news, encouraging and reinforcing the message of these industrial clusters. Within the Industrial Clusters Mission, we work with the 6 largest clusters in there and other clusters as well coming up. And what you can see collectively, those ones starting from Grangemouth, Teesside, Humberside, Southampton, South Wales, and the North East. Collectively, they put somewhere just below the 40 million tons of CO2 per year. So it is a significant contribution to the total CO2 emissions in the UK. Now, why is the focus on this? The focus is because these clusters, this manufacturing business, they're actually sharing infrastructure, they are setting resources, and this is both with the supply chains and the workforce. So it's a fertile ground for these low carbon technologies to be deployed. And because of that, what we are looking here, as you have on the bottom bullet point, is actually create opportunities to work together to find cost-effective solutions to decarbonisation. So a little bit more about the Industrial Clusters Mission. So you can see there is the program is funded by 170 millions and then is expected to match by funding of up to 261 millions. The infographic that you have on the right-hand side gives you more information about the size of these clusters, the size of the activities, the different type of sectors. We are looking here, 1.5 million jobs, 320 billion pounds worth of exports. So these are significant contributors to the UK economy. The program has 3 strands of activities. And the first one is a demonstrator, so shared infrastructure. That is the value of 132 million pounds and is administered by Innovate UK. There is a second strand of activity is around cluster plans or roadmaps known before as well. And this is around 8 million pounds. And again, this fund is administered by Innovate UK. And then we have the Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre. That as a short acronym we know as IDRIC. And this is a 20 millions initiative and is coordinated by EPSRC. So one of the 3 points I want to make here is that these 3 strands are actually operating very closely together. And that's the kind of the intention and the winnings that we can do by running something that is really unique when you look really worldwide. I would like to say that we have a research and innovation centre operating alongside cluster plans, roadmaps to decarbonisation, and also together and alongside demonstrator and deployment projects. And the opportunities around cross-learning the opportunities around knowledge exchange and skills that actually get amplified by taking this approach. So let me talk now a little bit about IDRIC, the delivery objectives, and how this is actually also related to the 10-point plan for a green industrial cluster. So if we look at the 10-point plan, I was mentioning before around those key messages, accelerating our path to net zero, supporting green jobs, and excuse me, building back better. So we need to accelerate our path to net zero. And to accelerate our path to net zero, we'll actually need to do what we call as collaborations at scale and collaborations and pace. We need to build back better. And to do that, we need to have solutions that integrate technology, policy, and business models. And clear and key to all this, it will be supporting green jobs. And as part of that, what we need to make sure is that we have skills that are fit for the future. So what I want to do in the remaining time of my presentation, I want to go through each of these points and actually cover them into more detail, because through each of those points, I will be able to answer the question I pose myself as to how we can realize the role of gas in industrial decarbonization for green economic recovery. Excuse me. So starting with collaborations at scale and pace. I've been talking about IDRIC, and hopefully many of you are familiar with IDRIC, including collaborators across many universities in Imperial College as well. So the IDRIC community, as you have there, actually includes 142 partners. In addition to the funds requested from UKRI, we have also been able to match £10 million of support. And something I want to highlight here when you look at the right-hand side, this is not only about research organizations and universities that we have a key role to play to be able to achieve net zero, but it's also getting all the research and innovation ecosystem together. And that's what we are doing here with IDRIC. We have 74 industry partners, we have 35 associations, NGOs and trade organizations, and we also have 10 policymakers and government bodies, all of them working together to actually design and deploy this research and innovation program. Again, on the left-hand side, you have the largest industrial clusters. I would like to add here as well that as part of the roadmaps, phase 1, it was also the cluster in the Black Country as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what sectors we are looking at as part of this IDRIC and industrial decarbonization. And one of the things that we have to be clear is, although the sectors may not change much in terms of which ones they are, so if you look in that slide there, you have iron and steel, you have chemicals, non-metallic minerals. However, what is important to realize is that the proportion of that sector varies depending where you are. And when you think about that, it's really not surprisingly that if you think about China, you are going to have a much higher proportion in terms of non-metallic minerals, iron and steel, compared to Europe, where actually chemicals are the predominant sector in terms of CO2 emissions. And therefore, what we need to be aware is that there are large regional differences between the amount of CO2 emissions. If you look worldwide, CO2 emissions are around the order of 28–25%. It's not too different what is in the UK, what is around 20% of our total CO2 emissions come from the industrial sector. So although there is geographical variations, however, the challenges remain the same across all these sectors. We have to consider that the emissions come from the process feedstock, and these are actually particularly difficult to deal with. We also have to consider that these processes or these sectors are highly integrated. So when we try to have an additional technology or try to change or increase it's going to actually have a knockdown effect, and we need to be very clear on that. The majority of this process demand high temperature. We also need to be careful that plants operating these processes and these sectors have long lifetimes, and most of them have not reached the end of their lifetime. And ultimately also, we need to remember that the majority of these sectors are producing low-cost commodity products, and that we are operating on a global competitive market. And this takes me back to the earlier message about carbon leakage and making sure that this is about keeping our manufacturing sector, but transforming it in a way that actually does not produce CO2 emissions and is able to achieve net zero targets. So by bringing the scale, the size, the pace through IDRIC, what we are doing is accelerating the innovation to decarbonize industry. So if you look at some of the functions and some of the focus areas, is making sure that the research is led by industry, addresses questions that industry needs to be able to resolve. There needs to be a clear pathways to impact, and because bringing all this ecosystem together will allow us to have a cross-learning exercises, allow us also to address aspects related to policy, regulation, and very, very important here as well, skills and talent. Ultimately, when you put all this together, what we will be able to do is actually to be leading internationally in terms of decarbonization of energy-intensive industries. And I won't go into detail, but what basically pop up now into the screens is actually different activities that we have planned and developed alongside all those different focus areas, starting from partnerships, industry sponsors, knowledge exchange platforms, secondments, business models, skills needs, and global knowledge sharing. So how can we do this? My previous slides were around having the size, having the pace, the scale of the operation. What I want to focus now in a bit more of what is really needed technically. And when I say technically, I don't mean just for the engineering side. I also include here policy, I include business models, I include skills, I include everything under there that we need to do. And the only way to be able to consider all that in a holistic way is by doing a systems approach, but making sure that the system approach is tailored at the cluster level for each cluster. So ultimately, what we want to deliver is this supporting foundation for technology and policy development. And you have there those three circles of how everything is really interconnected, starting with identifying, directing, coordinating the research needs, making sure that after we work together with our industrial partners and we identify their industrial needs, we continue that alignment through the process. And ultimately, through this alignment, we will be able to enable implementation and impact. As a result, what we have is a co-created program of research and innovation. And within that program, there is actually objectives related to reducing costs, reducing risks, reducing timelines, reducing emissions, and always bolting to all of these economic aspects, policy and social aspects. Now, I want to kind of reflect a little bit on the next two slides, and to do that, I've taken advantage of the paper published by the Sustainable Gas Institute, the white paper on the greener gas grid, because I think there are two really key messages that we need to reflect, that you probably are aware of, around this whole systems approach. So the first message I want to kind of try to get across over to you is around networks, gas networks. So when we think about gas, when we think about this systems approach, the networks are going to be key in terms of being able to deliver this gas. And as you can see from that slide there, and the white paper can be downloaded from the SFI web page. this has to be considered. This has to consider production. It has to consider supply. It has to consider transmission, storage, as we are going to be moving into very large volumes of hydrogen, and finally that transmission and the distribution. And all this is going to present significant challenges that we need to address. As I said, the 2020s are really critical for us. If we do not do this in the 2020s, I would like to say that we kind of have missed the boat, unfortunately. So I think we can do it, but we need to keep moving and moving at a pace together. So there are a lot of challenges here. Network conversion, as it was pointed out in the report. We need to consider standard safety. We need to consider consumer awareness and many other aspects that we need to address in the very near future, in the very near short term. So I've been talking about hydrogen through the presentation. I've been mentioning gas, the Sustainable Gas Institute. Adam in his introductory slides as well talk about different gas vectors. And I think here the message I want to take, and again reflecting on the white paper, is that we have multiple of options here. I don't think there is anything that I would say straight away is the best option. I think we need to analyze and be careful in how we consider each of them. And in some cases, what we are going to see is, as it happens in many other low carbon technologies, that there are windows of opportunities where some technologies are going to be deployed first, while maybe we give more space or time for other technologies to come up later. And that's really illustrated in those two graphs, where you can compare CO2 emissions on the left-hand side to cost on the right-hand side. And obviously, if you're thinking, for instance, about biogas, biomethane, there is the potential there for negative emissions. But then again, is where are we going to make sure that we have all the biomass available to be able to achieve all the levels that we need of gas to get our targets to net zero. You have also considering options around SMR, around electrolysis. All of them will be related to costs, CO2 emissions, and again, when all these can be deployed. Ultimately, when you think about that, we need to produce a lot more of sustainable gas than we do now. If you think about my previous slides, a lot more. Let me reinforce that. And also, we will need to be very critical as to what are we going to use it for. And I keep saying that we need to move fast and speed and pace and in a just transitions concept, and things are happening. So I also want to put the message there. We need more of this, but there are things happening. And those two tables there actually summarize some of the projects, really exciting projects happening right now in the UK. On the left-hand side, you have a demonstration phase, hydrogen technology projects. And on the right-hand side, you have industrial decarbonisation deployment projects that have gone through phase 1 and now soon hopefully moving into phase 2 for most of the activities as part of the industrial decarbonisation challenge. A couple of points that I want to make in that slide. And if you're able to look in terms of what projects you have in there, what you will see is actually a lot of those projects are happening on the industrial clusters, not surprisingly. But the second point, and again, probably you already have picked that up, and the second point I want to make around these projects is that ports are going to be at the heart of this hydrogen revolution. And this is not just in the UK, it actually happens pretty much in Europe and elsewhere. So every single one of those dots and where those projects are right now happening, they have this port access, and we're going to see that having a huge demand and a huge effect in terms of this hydrogen revolution. Now, I've been mentioning a little bit about the policy and other different aspects, and I think this gives you hopefully an overview of many of the things that have to be considered as part of this integrated systems approach. If we look on the left-hand side, as you probably know, we have in the UK put by the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, BASE for short, the UK Hydrogen Advisory Council. And this is actually a key body that is informing in terms of the advance and development of hydrogen technologies. Very important, in 2021, we're going to see the strategy for hydrogen published this coming spring, and this will be critical in terms of seeing how we're able to do that pace that I was mentioning before. I've been talking about the size of what we need to do or what we need to achieve, and obviously linked with that, we're going to need to have business models in place. There is a first report about business models for low carbon hydrogen that was published this August. There is more work coming, and again, 2021, we are going to see a lot more coming out, and I think there is also here opportunities for engagement to actually define what these business models will look like. And right now there are many different options, as you know, if you have read the report or you are involved in this area, going all the way from actually contract payments to producers to end user subsidies and things in between as well. And all these have to be carefully analyzed. Quite importantly as well, I was talking about the consumer in one of my previous, or end users as well, in one of my previous slides. And we need to make sure that as part of this hydrogen transformation, there is actually, we need to consider how we engage with the public and how we make sure that we do this together. And together includes the general public and understanding these public attitudes and working and co-creating this transformation together. And the last report that I have in there is an international guide. It's quite useful as well. It gives you around different countries, including the UK and many other, in terms of where they are within their promise of hydrogen. And I think that's particularly important. I also want to mention here the Mission Innovation that has a program in hydrogen, because when I talk about collaboration and I talk about working together, this is not just the UK. It's actually, we need to do that, and at the international scale, if we're going to be able to just remember to keep within those 560 gigatons of CO2, that's the total budget we have for everybody. So we need to make sure that we actually share it and we distribute it as equitable as we can in what is a just transition. Okay, so the last part now of my presentation, I want to reflect on another really key element that we need to actually be able to decarbonize industry. I'm focusing on industry in the UK, but I think the skills for the future is a much wider dialogue that we need to have. And let me start by looking at this slide here. Generally, skills for green economic recovery. And it's actually, I don't know if you got the opportunity to read back in September this year, within the UK context, the Lifetime Skills Warranty. And this is a quite powerful message. And the first time you read it, you may be a little bit disturbed when we cannot save every job. You know, it's a hard thing to say. I think that the message coming afterwards is what I particularly want to focus on. And that is, what we can do is to give people the skills to find and create new and better jobs. And I think here is where our commitment should be, that we actually give this commitment to make this creation for new and better jobs. So, how this looks, say, for instance, one of the reports published by the Aldersgate Group. What we are here is actually pushing an open door, and we just need to keep this in mind as well. The general public wants to actually be involved, and if you look at those numbers there, we are looking at 78% of the UK adults want to play a part in reaching the UK to net zero goal. 57% they want to work for an organization that help us to get there. So these are really powerful messages. We have a commitment to do, but we are also being asked by the general public to actually deliver, to have a clear mandate as it says the picture on your right-hand side. And within that, what we have is actually what we need is a low carbon skills strategy. So what does it mean, skills for industrial decarbonization? If you look at the left-hand side, we have there a report published by the ECITB, published earlier on this year in March, a really good report looking in terms of what the skills we are going to need for this net zero transition. And actually this report also put it in context of the 2020 to 2030s, and then actually reaching the 2050 net zero. And as you can see, within each of those timelines, there are different technologies, different needs, different skills that will be needed. And the report was very clear in terms of we need to identify and close skill gaps. We need to actually minimize any skill shortages, and we need to leverage policy and innovation. Now, all the diagrams and the maps that you have on the right-hand side are an illustration of some of the clusters that we work with. And what you can see in there is that the level of activities, the level of integration, the industries is just a huge task, and we need to make sure that they actually retain the jobs, not only retain them, but we actually create new jobs. And just to give you some numbers, for instance, in the case of the Humber cluster, what we have is 55,000 jobs in manufacturing in that area or that cluster alone. And it's actually 20% of the economy of the Humber is actually related to these energy intensive industries. If you look at operations like CCS, just for one of the clusters alone could create 5,000 jobs. And then, of course, you could scale that across all the UK and internationally. So it's a double job here between protecting jobs and creating new jobs. And within IDRIC, excuse me. And within IDRIC, what we have is this future-proofing skills program. I won't go into detail, but what we have is we will be doing the first UK skill needs assessment, and this will look at the core and the supply chain workforce that is needed to achieve net zero. We're going to be looking alongside that provisions for training and skills. We will need to develop framework competencies. There are going to be new jobs, new skills that will actually need to be put in place. And clearly, and very importantly, there is a huge amount of knowledge and skills that also will need to transfer from some of our existing energy sectors to some emerging industries like hydrogen. So I'm going to be wrapping up now because it's about time as well. So hopefully you are still with me wherever you are. The question, if you remember, that I posed at the beginning of my presentation is how can we realize the role of gas in green recovery? And I hope this through the last slides and the last 40 minutes we've been together, I was able to get some of these messages across, but they are summarized in those boxes in there. So there is an urgency message. I hope I was able to translate over to you together at the scale and pace. And this is very, very important. What does it mean this together? It means many things. We need to make sure that we bring the research and the innovation ecosystem. We need to make sure that we look at the systems approach, so we integrate solutions at the scale. Also means that we need to grow our skills together and share knowledge. And all this ultimately will be needed so we can actually lead pathways internationally to achieve net zero. Spreading the message is going to be key, and over the last 10 months we've been very active in terms of trying to get these messages across to the cement industry, to the chemistry industry, to the steels industry, and hopefully some of these actually we are seeing a huge amount of positive responses as well coming from all the sectors. And finally, if you remember, I said I was going to have a wist, and that wist actually it reflects the time of the year that you are in. You may have seen this cartoon. Maybe I should have been given all the naughty kids solar panels instead of coal. I'm actually gonna take the liberty of do a slight change and say maybe give electrolyzers. I have intentionally stay away from any colored hydrogen, but I'll be happy to take that in the questions if they can. So that's all I want to say. Thank you very much again to Adam, to Nigel for inviting me to do this presentation, this annual lecture. It's been really a pleasure also working and interacting with the team in SGI, and particularly I just want to thank Emily. I want to thank Marina and Jasmine for all their help, and thank you to the Sustainable Gas Institute. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Mercedes. That was a really interesting presentation from my point of view. I'm sure if we were in a lecture theatre right now, there would be a resounding applause. Of course, we're doing these things online, so you'll just have to take my thank you as that resounding applause. And just to say that we did yesterday had almost 900 people registered for this event, so a very, very decent audience. One of the benefits perhaps of the pandemic is that a lot of people are able to attend these events simultaneously when it's very hard for us to find a lecture theatre that large. And I think it's just a reflection, Mercedes, of how impressive this work is. Really, really interesting to see such large alliances being formed around these critical topics. So great to see, and thank you very much from us at the Sustainable Gas Institute for delivering the annual lecture. So I want to use the last few minutes that we have until 3 p.m. Just to pose a few questions to you that we've had in the chat. So thank you to very much to everyone who's been publishing questions. We won't have time to go through all of them. We will offer Mercedes the opportunity to answer them offline at the end of the event. So we'll just try and cover a few of them now. And I think a good place to start, perhaps, is one which came up a couple of times. And this relates to production-based emissions versus consumption-based emissions, essentially. So one question was, the point was made that the UK has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions while still growing economically. Is that still the case if one includes the greenhouse gas emissions emitted by industry supplying the UK from abroad that has moved from the UK, for example, to the Far East? And equally, a kind of related question was about policy. So you mentioned policy that drives manufacturing overseas and how this can be avoided. So what would that policy look like, and is it practical?
Okay, so I think the first question has to do the plot that I presented, the one where I was comparing from the Committee on Climate Change published last May, May 2019, actually only included territorial emissions. And I think the question comes, what happens if you put non-territorial emissions in that plot, in that graph? And I think obviously then the situation will not look as good as it look in that graph, but still we have been able to grow our economy and decrease our CO2 emissions, but it will not be the gap will not be as large. Now, in terms of the policy, so how we can actually ensure that we don't drive our manufacturing sector overseas. I think there is still a lot of discussion as to how we can do that, how actually the business models that they will be coming in 2021 around hydrogen, around CCUS, how we can do that in a way that you could do that. I don't think there is any particular clear winner that is going to be able to give us everything. You can think about carbon taxes, tariffs set up in borders, a carbon price that it goes across, but ultimately we just need to be careful that we don't lose the manufacturing sector that we have here, that we continue importing goods from elsewhere where actually their carbon footprint may be even larger than here. So I don't have an answer to the way to do it. I think if I had the answer, probably I would have shared it with you all. So I think what we need to do is work together to make sure that we come up with those answers within 2021. That is going to be a critical year around strategy and business models.
Superb, thank you. I think to move on to another question, and this one came up a couple of times as well, was how important is the role of our domestic oil and gas sector in delivering an effective energy transition? And a follow-up to that about the role potential of unconventional oil and gas.
So could you repeat the last part of the question, Adam? I didn't get to hear you well, sorry.
The last part was just a quick appendum to that question, which was specifically the role of unconventional oil and gas.
Okay, So in terms of unconventional oil and gas, I'm going to understand by that we possibly mean fracking. I don't know if that may be
yes.
one of the options that
yeah.
it was. Okay. So that's quite an interesting picture, because obviously the scenario around unconventional gas in the UK or in Europe compared to the US is completely different in terms of what we have seen happening with unconventional gas in the UK. So in the US, actually making them, they don't need to import more gas because they produce through the fracking and other activities. So I think the role that we have, ultimately what we need to make sure is that we are able to account for the emissions that come from whatever energy source we use, and we put that into the picture in terms of how we can achieve net zero. I think one message, and I was saying at the end of my presentation, I have deliberately stay away from colors when talking about hydrogen. And the international report that I mentioned in my presentation actually had a very strong message that there are going to be different ways of produce hydrogen or producing gas. And I think what we need to make sure is that different models and policy can account for them. So I think what we need to consider is that in some countries, unconventional gas is going to play a role in the coming years. Is how we can do it in a way actually that then we may be able to couple CCS or CCUS, so we still come up to net zero emissions.
Sorry, just one very quick last question, Mercedes, maybe with a 1-minute answer. So this one is maybe a bit challenging. So why is the transition to hydrogen as a fuel source being pursued so much more aggressively compared to other options such as wider scale electrification? And it's about the energy input required for H2 production through electrolysis. If it's to come from renewables, needs to be carbon neutral, and would it be more efficient just to use renewables directly?
Okay. So I think, again, maybe going to the 6 carbon budget that was published yesterday and looking at other similar analysis done on a global picture, I don't think hydrogen is particularly being aggressively put into the discussion there. I think all of these different ways of electricity, power, fuels have a place to play. Electrification is very important as well, but I think what we need to consider is how some of these technologies, and clearly the role of hydrogen, when you look at some of the statistics I have shared with you today, is still quite a bit of uncertainty on the role of hydrogen, and that will be driven by cost. So if you remember, I was saying at the EU level could be somewhere between 5 to 8 times as much. If you look at the scenarios from the Committee on Climate Change, in those scenarios, the amount of hydrogen with respect to electrification also varies tremendously, and part of that variation has to do with innovation and bringing down costs. So I think we need to look at all these things together and where are going to be the best trade-offs with technology, innovation, behavior change that I mentioned just probably only a couple of times in my presentation, and all that with the policy that is needed. Everything has to be considered, and I think the CCC gave us 5 different scenarios of how you can look at this from different angles.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mercedes. So that's all we have time for, unfortunately, with the Q&A. There was a lot of interesting questions put in the Q&A, and we will give, like I said, give Mercedes the opportunity to answer some offline later. But for now, I'd just like to, again, thank you very much, Mercedes, for agreeing to deliver the annual lecture. Some really interesting insights, and I'm sure very useful for our audience. I'd also like to thank the production team. So behind the scenes, we have Emily, Marina, Jasmine, and Jamie as well, who've been making this all come together. And of course, thank you to the audience for joining us. The video will be available right away after this event using your sign-in link, so you can come back and have another look if you want to. Please do follow us on social media, subscribe to our newsletters, and if you do have any questions, there is the email address in front of you. So thank you all very much once again. Thank you, Mercedes, and have a good morning, afternoon, or evening.